August, 1862. The Civil War is raging throughout the United States. The eyes of a war-torn nation are riveted on the conflict between the North and South. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles to the northwest, in the new state of Minnesota, another long simmering dispute, this one between the native Dakotas and European newcomers, is about to explode. The words of Dakota Chief Big Eagle.
It began to be whispered about that now would be a good time to go to war with the whites and get back the lands.
The Dakotas have ceded their lands to the U.S. for food that never seems to come. They have seen promised money vanish into the pockets of unscrupulous traders. In 50 years of dealing with the United States, the self-sufficient Dakotas have been reduced to mere beggars.
I can't provide for my family and I have to take handouts. I have to go up to the agency and beg the agent for food. It has to be devastating. It has to be just psychologically devastating.
That devastation simmers to a rage. The Minnesota frontier is about to erupt into one of the bloodiest Indian wars the United States has ever known.
I think that it came down to, I got to defend my homeland, I've got to defend my way of life. I am a Dakota.
The year is 1800. The lands of the upper Mississippi, in what will become Minnesota, teem with life. This land of great forests and rivers is home to a powerful native people the Americans call the Sioux, a word meaning enemy. These people call themselves the Dakotas.
The word Dakota itself means friendship or allies. The proper meaning would be of Dakota would be a group of people who were allied together through a common descendancy. That's Dakota.
The Dakotas enjoy a rich life hunting in the forests and on the plains, trapping and fishing in the rivers. To the Dakotas, this land is everything.
They call it the Creator, which today we call God. And they saw God, or the Creator, in everything. He made the trees, he made the birds, and he made this a place for people to be to enjoy. So we saw it as like heaven.
Many Dakotas live in villages along the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. One of the most important sites is Kaposha. It is near here that the Dakotas will meet a man whose visit will be a catalyst for great change. 1805. American explorer Zebulon Pike urges the Dakotas to allow the U.S. military to build a fort and trading post just a few miles away from Kaposha.
Well, these posts are intended as a benefit to you. It is the intention of the United States to establish at these posts factories in which the Indians may procure all their things at a cheaper and better rate than they do now. You will see the traders that go up your rivers and know that they are good men.
Eager to trade their furs for white man's goods like blankets, firearms, and alcohol, the Dakotas permit the United States to establish the post. Fort Snelling is built in 1819. It attracts dozens of American traders.
They were not a predatory class of people. They were entrepreneurs for whom profit prevailed over all else, but they were not unsympathetic to the Indians, and in fact, they got along pretty well with them.
Traders aren't alone in recognizing the beauty and value of the Minnesota Valley. By the 1830s, settlers begin moving in. St. Paul, just downriver from Kaposha, becomes a thriving village. For the Dakotas, the growth brings profound and unwelcome change.
These two alien cultures side by side were bound to create friction. And so I think life adjustments became a little bit harder, especially for the Dakota, because we've been here since the beginning of time, and all of a sudden these aliens are coming in, and certainly there was no stopping them. They were here to stay.
With their hunting grounds depleted of precious deer and beaver, the Dakotas' economic base begins to crumble. For guidance, the people of Kaposha turn to an emerging leader among the Dakotas, the son of an influential chief. His name is Little Crow. Artist Frank Blackwell Mayer paints this portrait and feels immediate respect.
The chief is a man of some 45 years of age and of a very determined and ambitious nature, but withal exceedingly gentle and dignified in his deportment. His face is full of intelligence when he is in conversation, and his whole bearing is that of a gentleman.
He cared about his people. He cared about what happened to them. He was not a fighter. He didn't want to be a fighter. He wanted to remain neutral. He wanted to get along because he knew that this is the way things were going to be. It wasn't going to be our country anymore.
Little Crow's instincts prove correct. In 1849, the United States admits its newest territory, Minnesota. This move will attract even more settlers to Dakota lands, lands the government now eyes. July 1851. Little Crow and other Dakota chiefs journey down the Minnesota to a place called Traverse des Sioux. Here, Territorial Governor Alexander Ramsey pressures them to do the unthinkable, to sign a treaty that will relinquish their lands. Ramsey warns the Dakotas.
You would not only have the whites along the river in front, but all around you. You should pass away from the river and go farther west.
The treaty commissioners literally bullied the Indians. In other words, you better go along and get what we're offering out of it, because if you don't, we're going to take it anyway and you won't get anything.
Ramsey offers to pay the Dakotas $3 million in cash and annuities to be distributed over 50 years. In exchange, the government will claim more than 24 million acres of the Dakotas' homeland. The tribe will then be relocated west to reservations on the Minnesota prairie. Like all Dakotas, Little Crow feels a strong attachment to the land, but he also realizes the power of the United States. Despite having his life threatened by Dakotas opposing the pact, Little Crow steps forward to sign the Treaty of Traverse de Sioux.
I am willing to be the first, but I am not afraid that you will kill me. I believe this treaty will be the best for the Dakotas, and I will sign it, even if a dog kills me before I lay down the goose quill.
Stunned and heartbroken, the Dakotas prepare to leave their homes. For generations, this land has fed, nurtured, and provided for them. Now they must leave it forever.
Some were angry, some were sad. Old people probably mourned the loss, probably mourned that their children, that their grandchildren would never get to see what they had seen.
And in our spirituality, we're related to everything here. You know, we're related to the trees and to the grasses. Our gardens were here. Our food supply was here. Our dreams and our life, the living and the dying, was here. And so, and you're leaving that. So I imagine there was a great sadness.
That sadness will slowly become a rage with a force the American frontier has never seen. It is some of the finest farmland on earth. Dark soil enriched by 1,000,000 fallow years and fed by 1,000 lakes and streams. The 1851 Treaty of Traverse de Sioux opens the door to a flood of settlers. The Dakotas can hardly believe their eyes.
You're going to resent them people because they're living on your land. They put a fence around your land and they're calling it their own, and anything that goes on to that land, a deer, a rabbit, a squirrel, any kind of food that's you're used to eating goes onto that land, automatically becomes the property of that person.
Over the next 10 years, the population of Minnesota will grow from 5,000 to 150,000. Many are Northern European immigrants coming from Germany, Sweden, and Norway. They build towns like New Ulm and Mankato.
They came to Minnesota to build a new life for themselves, to build a solid civilization. They represented really the American dream. They came to this country to realize the American dream, and Minnesota was where they were going to do it.
Among those searching for the American dream is the family of Lavina Eastlick. They homestead on the Minnesota prairie near Lake Chetek.
My husband chose a beautiful spot for our home. It was situated about midway between the two ends of the lake. He built a house, put in crops, and we began to feel quite happy and content.
Dakotas are anything but happy and content. Told to stay on their reservation, they soon feel surrounded.
It was incomprehensible to them that they would be, like cattle, fenced in. And it was I think it was really hard for them that, we can no longer roam, we're no longer free.
For many Dakotas, the change to reservation life is unbearable.
They said that we couldn't worship our Father and pray to our Father, that they had their own Father and they had a Bible. They said we had to learn how to live and pray by their ways, and that we couldn't pray to our Heavenly Father about our earth, our food, whatever. We had to use the white man's way.
The U.S. government builds agencies to distribute items described in the 1851 treaty. But promised goods like food and blankets often arrive late and in poor condition. To simply survive, the Dakotas must deal with a new breed of traders who often view the Indians with contempt and charge them exorbitant prices.
These traders of the 1850s were vultures. They kept the Indians in debt. It was a predatory system. The traders were there to make all of the profit they possibly could from the dollars that were due to the Indians, and they succeeded in doing that year after year.
The government encourages traders to extend credit to the Dakotas. In order to pay their debts, the Dakotas' cash annuity usually ends up in the traders' pockets. More often than not, the Dakotas get nothing. Once a free, proud, and self-sufficient people, the Dakotas are now almost totally dependent on the United States.
It's very hard to watch your child cry because they're hungry. So you get angry. You have to go and get them something to eat, whether you steal it from a white farmer or you sneak along and try to find something for them to eat, and you're outside the boundaries of the reservation. It must have been just a total hardship for those people to even, why are they doing this to us? What have we done?
1858. With most Dakotas hopelessly in debt, Little Crow and other chiefs agree to sell the U.S. half of their remaining lands. But the hungry Dakotas will never see a penny from the land sale. Instead, the money is given directly to the traders to settle past debts.
So eventually it got to the point where the warriors said, we can't sit here and watch our kids die in this manner. Our elders die in this manner, this slow death, this genocide, what they're doing.
August 1862. A hungry group of Dakotas tries to break into a government warehouse full of food. Little Crow is called in to mediate. He tells the Americans,
when men are hungry, they help themselves.
One particularly arrogant trader named Andrew Myrick answers.
So far as I am concerned, if they are hungry, let them eat grass.
As Myrick's remarks are translated, the furious Dakotas break into angry shouts. Calm is restored when some food is distributed. But the Dakotas' outrage and fury continue to build.
You have to sketch the conditions at the Sioux agencies in the summer of 1862 were sort of a boiling cauldron with the lid popping up and down on it. The pent-up rage among the Dakotas lacked only some kind of an incident to set off an explosion.
12 days later, the fuse is lit. August 17th, 1862. 4 young Dakotas argue. One calls another a coward for refusing to steal eggs from a white farmer. Dakota Chief Big Eagle.
The other replied, "I am not a coward. I am not afraid of the white man, and to show I am not, I will go to the house and shoot him. Are you brave enough to go with me?"
The young men shoot and kill 5 settlers, including 2 women.
Soon the cry was, "Kill all the whites." A council was held and war was declared. Parties formed and dashed away in the darkness to kill settlers.
In this time of crisis, the Dakotas again turned to Little Crow. The enraged young warriors asked him to lead them into what just a few years earlier would have been inconceivable: war with the United States. Little Crow scolds the young men, then agrees to lead them.
You are like dogs in the hot moon when they run mad and snap at their own shadows. You are fools. You will die like the rabbits when the hungry wolves hunt them in the hard moon. Little Crow is not a coward. He will die with you.
But it wasn't an easy decision, and I don't think he even realized or even thought that he would ever win. But it was better to die fighting, struggling to stay alive than just to lay down and let the inevitable happen.
When your back's against the wall, you only have one way out, then you're going to go and fight and protect your family, and they're going to fight for that. It wasn't our idea to go and attack and kill everybody just to kill them. We suffered.
August 18th, 1862. A peaceful dawn at the Lower Sioux Agency is about to be shattered. Little Crow and his warriors launch a brutal attack on the traders and government employees. One of the first whites the Dakotas find is the hated trader, Andrew Myrick. Big Eagle is there.
Mr. Andrew Myrick, a trader, had refused some hungry Indians credit a short time before when they asked him for some provisions. He said to them, "Go and eat grass." Now he was lying on the ground, dead, with his mouth stuffed full of grass.
More than 20 lie dead at the Lower Agency, the first to die in the Great Dakota Conflict.
So yeah, okay, this is going to be it. We're going to move all these people out of here. That way maybe they'll listen to see that we're really sincere and we really need help. And that we're not going to take this anymore. You know, this is what they were thinking then. They had to. I know it.
A relief column from nearby Fort Ridgely attempts to rescue those at the agency. Little Crow's warriors ambush the soldiers. "24 soldiers are gunned down trying to cross the Minnesota River."
I think it was passion being released, the frustration and the anger and the hatred of that had been submersed for such a long period of time. It's like a volcano that finally erupts. And a volcano, when it erupts all over everything. And it's like rage.
Their anger spreads across the land like a prairie fire.
These German and Scandinavian farmers were totally unprepared for what hit them. They had no warning of what was coming. They had no understanding of what lay behind it. They were ill-prepared to fend off the warriors that swarmed over their homestead. They simply fell helpless before the rifles and tomahawks of the Indians.
One of the hardest-hit settlements is Lake Chetek. Lavina Eastlick, her family, and neighbors are pinned down in a swamp for 6 horrific hours.
The balls fell around us like hail. I lay in the grass with my little ones gathered around me. I could hear the groans about me in the grass. I was shot in the side. Another shot soon struck me on the head. My husband moved, and when I heard a bullet strike someone, I called to him. But there was no reply. I heard someone call out, "Mother!" I looked, and there stood little Frank, my oldest child, on his knees while blood was streaming from his mouth. He had been shot. What could I do? Nothing, but gaze in silent horror.
Terribly wounded, Lavina crawls across the prairie for days before being rescued and taken to New Ulm. There she is reunited with 2 of her 5 children who somehow have survived the attack. Others aren't as fortunate. In just a few days, more than 100 Minnesotans have been killed by the Dakotas. 215 more have been taken hostage.
After the fact, they started to see Little Crow was right. We did act like dogs in the afternoon heat. We're crazy.
While these young warriors were spreading all over the countryside, killing and plundering, Little Crow had a much more realistic view of their situation. He knew that any possible hope of success depended on clearing the way down the Minnesota Valley towards St. Paul and creating such havoc there that the whites would be willing to negotiate some kind of an accommodation.
August 20th, 1862. Little Crow's first step towards clearing the Minnesota Valley is to attack Fort Ridgely, a U.S. military installment located 20 miles downriver from the Lower Agency. A handful of soldiers armed with artillery are able to hold off 600 of Little Crow's warriors. Furious Dakotas now set their sights on the largest white settlement near the reservation, New Ulm.
New Ulm was a town of German immigrants, and the German immigrants weren't really that friendly with the Dakota people. They didn't bother to try to learn the customs of the Dakota people. They didn't try to learn any of the words, and they treated Dakotas badly. August
23rd, 1862. The 900 men, women, and children of New Ulm prepare for the attack. Leading the town's defense is Charles Flandreau. He recalls the battle in a diary.
They came in at close mass at a moderate gait until they were within about double rifle shot from us, when they deployed to the right and left, and then gave a blood-curdling yell and sailed down on us like the wind. I shall never forget the anxiety I felt as to the result of the charge upon our men. When they got within a couple of 100 yards of us, they opened fire. Several of our men were down, and the whole line wavered and fell back. The firing from both sides then became general, sharp and rapid, and every man did his own work after his own fashion.
Despite being greatly outnumbered, the defenders of New Ulm hold the Dakotas back. It is the turning point of the Dakota conflict.
And as one of the chiefs said, New Ulm was the door to St. Paul, and the settlers slammed the door shut. From that moment on, the uprising was doomed to failure.
As word of the Dakota conflict spreads throughout Minnesota, panic and outrage grow. Governor Alexander Ramsey.
The Sioux Indians of Minnesota must be exterminated or driven forever beyond the borders of our state. The public safety imperatively requires it. Justice calls for it. The blood of the murdered cries to heaven for vengeance on those assassins of women and children.
Henry Sibley, himself an old trader with the Dakotas, is made a colonel and put in charge of a military force. He leads 1,600 men into the Minnesota Valley to punish the Dakotas and rescue the hostages. Meanwhile, in the Dakota camp, Little Crow's support is beginning to fade.
Little Crow no longer had control over the warriors. They became independent bands, going out and wreaking havoc on and venting their frustrations on anything that got in the way.
September 23rd. Sibley and his troops stumble upon Dakota warriors near Wood Lake. After 2 hours of intense fighting, the Dakotas retreat. Little Crow and his supporters escape west onto the plains. But most Dakotas are becoming weary of war.
Even those who were the most impatient and those who were the angriest at this time, as a result of the battle that took place here, had to realize that it was kind of pointless, and it was causing more harm than anything else, and people weren't changing in spite of our resistance.
The defeat at Wood Lake convinces most Dakotas that this is a war they cannot possibly win. They release the 250 hostages and surrender to Sibley. Among those surrendering is Big Eagle.
I and others understood that General Sibley would treat with all of us who had only been soldiers and would surrender as prisoners of war. Only those who had murdered people in cold blood would be punished in any way.
6 weeks after it began, the Great Dakota conflict is over. But outraged Minnesotans demand vengeance. 400 citizens have been killed. The Dakotas must pay. October 1862. 400 settlers have been killed in the Great Dakota conflict. Citizens of Minnesota demand revenge. Henry Sibley heads a military commission to administer justice to the accused Dakotas. Some trials last just 5 minutes before a verdict is reached.
The trials themselves were more or less shows. All it took for somebody to be sentenced to death was for somebody of European descent to say, this person was at a site where a killing took place.
Sibley's military commission was a mockery of justice as we know it in the American system, because none of the protective safeguards for defendants was allowed to those Indians.
When the commission's work is done, 303 Dakotas are sentenced to death by hanging. The next month, Sibley leads the condemned on a forced march to the execution site at Mankato. They are paraded through New Ulm, the same town Dakota warriors had attacked just 3 months earlier. The furious townspeople become an uncontrollable mob.
All the people in New Ulm came out with their clubs, and they clubbed all the Indian people in that cart to death. My grandfather fell on the bottom of that cart, and his brother fell on top of him. And that's what saved his life.
The citizens of New Ulm and all of Minnesota are angered further by shocking news from Washington. Bishop Henry Whipple, a friend of the Dakotas, helps convince Abraham Lincoln to commute the sentences of 265 condemned Dakotas. But Lincoln signs a death warrant for 38 who are to be hung on the day after Christmas. December 1862. The 38 condemned Dakotas spend their final days in a crowded stockade outside of Mankato. Some talk with missionaries and write letters to loved ones. Others break into their death songs. One of the condemned, Hrdaya Ienka, writes to his father-in-law.
I have not killed, wounded, or injured a white man. I have not plundered their property, and yet today I am set apart for execution and must die in a few days. My wife is your daughter, my children your grandchildren. I leave them all in your care. Do not let them suffer. Let them not grieve for me. Let them remember that the brave should be prepared to meet death, and I will do as becomes a Dakota.
December 26, 1862. The 38 Dakotas are marched to the gallows. It is constructed so all will fall at once. This will be the largest mass execution in United States history. A reporter for the St. Paul Daily Press is a witness.
The prisoners mounted the gallows. The ropes were soon arranged around their necks. The white caps, which had been placed on the top of their heads, were now drawn down over their faces, shutting out forever the light of day from their eyes. Then ensued a scene that can hardly be described and which can never be forgotten. All joined in shouting and singing. The tone seemed somewhat discordant, and yet there was a harmony to it. The most touching scene was their attempts to grasp each other's hands, fettered as they were. they succeeded. 3 or 4 in a row were hand in hand, and all hands swaying up and down with the rise and fall of their voices. Captain Burt hastily scanned all the arrangements and motioned to Major Brown, the signal officer. And with a crash, down came the drop. It is unnecessary to speak of the awful sight of 38 human beings suspended in the air. Imagination will readily supply what we refrain from describing.
The dead are buried together in a shallow grave outside of Mankato. That night, the bodies are dug up by Dr. William Mayo, founder of the world-famous Mayo Clinic.
William W. Mayo and his friends didn't even let those bodies get cold before they dug them up. I don't know what kind of a person, a physician at that, could stomach to strip the flesh off the bones of these people and take them away to teach anatomy. To me, that's the height of total hatred for Dakota people.
The remaining Dakotas, nearly 2,000 men, women, and children, are imprisoned at Fort Snelling near St. Paul. The internment camp is just across the river from the once thriving village of Kaposha, a former haven for the Dakotas. It is now a living hell. There is inadequate food and shelter. Disease and despair set in. That winter, more than 130 die.
They began to look at their situation in a different way, that they were no longer going to be able to control their land, and that probably they would have to learn how to live like white people.
Spring, 1863. The Dakotas imprisoned at Fort Snelling are told they must leave Minnesota forever. They are loaded onto steamboats and taken to a reservation in what is today South Dakota, exiled from the land many of their people died for. The citizens of Minnesota believe that their Indian problem is gone. But there is one final scene to be played out. July 3rd, 1863. A settler near Hutchinson, Minnesota, opens fire on 2 Indians picking raspberries. One of the Indians, a middle-aged man, is killed. The body of the unidentified Indian is displayed on Main Street of Hutchinson, where it is scalped and mutilated. 26 days later, Minnesotans rejoice when they learn that the dead Indian is Little Crow.
He wanted to come back, but because this was part of his land. This was where he roamed, he hunted, he had relatives. He just wanted to, come home.
The death of Little Crow brings the Great Dakota conflict to a bitter end. The Dakotas may have lost their land, they may have lost the war, but they never lost their will to survive.
It was a war for survival. And in that part of the war, in that aspect of the war, we won. Because we're still here. We're still Dakota. We can still say we came from here and we arrived here and we survived in spite of it all.
Today, more than 1,000 Dakotas again call Minnesota home. They live on 4 small reservations scattered across the state. Here, many Dakotas believe their future depends on legalized casino gambling. Revenues from 4 casinos help to subsidize parks and public works projects on the reservations. But the Dakotas will never forget their past. Every December 26th, the anniversary of the execution, Dakota volunteers run 80 miles in bitter cold from Fort Snelling to the execution site in Mankato. The Dakotas say it's to honor the brave warriors who faced death on the gallows.
They say that when those men went up on the scaffold and one of them said, "Don't worry, we're going to come back in a different form on the wind."
The Dakotas believe they have come back on the wind and on the wings of eagles. Every year, as the Dakota runners enter Mankato, eagles fly overhead. It is said that the sacred birds carry the souls of the 38 who were executed here. For the Dakotas, as long as the spirits of the past visit the present, there is hope for the future.